everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery and I've got a couple bins to feed, so I figured I'd bring along the camera and have you guys keep me some company. So the bins that I've got in my sights for today are the ones down here on the lower shelf. The bin down here, dated September 13th, is exactly 1 week old today. So when we originally set the bin up, we launched it with a fair number of worms, and we did put a pretty good generous helping of food in there, but it was all kinds of foods that mostly gets consumed very quickly. Melon, banana peel, things of that nature. So I just wanted to make sure that there's an ample supply of food in that. So even if the food's not fully depleted yet, we're going to add some more. And then what's going on over there with those two pink pots, those are my African Nightcrawlers. Everything I have is red wigglers except for the African Nightcrawlers. Those bins are now somewhere in the neighborhood of 117, 119 days old now. And the worms have not actually been in those pots the entire time. The African Nightcrawler started in my time-lapse video, which if you want to check out the video, I'm going to put a link for it up in the corner there. And the other one was launched off into a little bit of a nursery pot, a smaller little bucket. But I'm really treating the age of those as the day on which the cocoons were launched into their bins, not knowing exactly when any of the worms were really born. I just treated that as the start day. It might be time to move them into larger bins at some point soon, but for now, since I did skip the last feeding, we're now at about 8 days since there was last food added to those bins. So I'm going to make sure that I replenish the food supply in those as well. So I'll begin with getting my newest bin up on the bench here. Alright, so if you watch that video, and I guess once again I could leave a little video link for you up here in the corner of when I launched this bin originally. I had put some food items in here that I don't know how far along it'll be in 1 week's time, but I figured let's take a peek. So now the food that I was planning to feed with is in this bucket here, and you can see there's a variety of different fruits and vegetables here. They're all frozen together here, but I'll break them apart before we add them to the bins. Romaine hearts, which went bad in the refrigerator. They're wrapped with a piece of paper towel, and that's good. That's all edible stuff as far as the worms are concerned. So let's start picking around in here to see how things are progressing. As I recall, there was a piece of melon placed right in the middle, and then around that were the banana peels. So I'm just curious to see how that melon is coming along. Just going to push stuff up to the sides here, and I think this would be a piece of the melon right there. Okay. And here too, another little piece of it. So I mean, I don't really see much, if any, of the red fleshy material of the watermelon. Only the green outside of the rind. So it seems like they've done quite well in consuming the melon. Here's another hunk of the melon rind. A little bit of pink left on it there, but there's certainly not much left at all. Here I could see the banana peels, which are almost intact still holding up pretty good. So I guess they're making their way into that stuff as well. But I think it's fair to say that we can certainly add a little bit more food to this bin, kind of keep things moving along. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to be kind of generous on this feeding. I'm going to go ahead and take these romaine hearts. They kind of shatter here as I try to rip at them because they are still frozen. So apologies to the little worms that are right beneath this layer of frozen food. They might not like that, so they can squirm off to the edges if they're not digging the cold. And it shouldn't take long for this stuff to thaw out at all. Now what I have here is what we found to be a little bit stinky in the last bin, but only when it's placed into the bin whole. So I think these potato skins since they are tiny fragments of potato, not just an entire baked potato, I think they'll get consumed pretty quickly and not have a chance to get stinky. But in my couple other bins that I fed in my last video, the potatoes definitely got stinky after a few weeks of, slowly being consumed from the outside in. Okay, so here's a handful of veggie scraps, and here's another handful. So I think that is a very nice, generous feeding for them. So hopefully that'll keep them occupied for a little while. I'm looking forward to seeing how the action is down the center of this bin next time we check in on it. So yeah, I like what I'm seeing here after the first week of progress, to see that they've eaten the majority of the food that they were given. But I do like the idea of maintaining a nice healthy supply of food for these little guys and not letting it run out. So I want to get them accustomed to there being plenty of food for them in their bin. So that's my newest bin after 1 week progress. That was the first of hopefully many feedings to come. So now we're going to move on to taking care of the 2 pot bins that have the Nightcrawlers in them. Okay, so now this is the smaller of the 2. This is the African Nightcrawler bin. The African Nightcrawler bin is smaller because it was started with a fewer quantity of worms. It was originally started in my time-lapse bin with 100 Nightcrawler cocoons, African Nightcrawler cocoons, and the worms hatched out in that time-lapse container and have been in here since. And I've been trying to continuously give them more and more food as they increase in size and get more mature. So like I've done in the past, I'm going to take this plastic bin that I have here and I'm going to pull off some of this leaf cover, because it's really in good shape still. There's no sense in blending it in yet. I'd like to continue to use this leafy cover as cover as long as I can. And that'll give us access to the lower areas where the worms are. So the last time we checked in here, 3-4 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, there were still remnants of the feeding that they'd received about a week before, maybe 6 days prior or 8 days prior, I don't remember. And those were hunks of cantaloupe rind. And as I look through here, I'm still seeing a fair amount of it here. So I just want to get a better sense of how things are progressing here. I'm going to try to pull out as much of it as I can locate. So granted, cantaloupe normally has this kind of orangish, fleshy color to it. And the rinds are kind of a beige, light brown color. So as far as the fleshy, orange, meaty part of the melon, it would appear that they've gone to town on that for the most part and stripped off all the soft, easy to eat stuff. And the rinds are probably also being gradually worked down. So here and there you could see a worm on one. And here too you could still see a little bit of the fleshy orange material on this melon rind. The stem of a banana. Alrighty. I mean, I was seeing a few worms here and there, and granted this was a fairly small population of worms, and it is also a fairly small space that they're occupying. And worms do generally control their population depending not only on food supply but also on the size of the space that they have to inhabit. And I believe I also recently learned that they even control their size to a certain point. So if you've got very puny worms, it could be because you've given them only a very puny space in which to live. So I'm finding that maybe maybe a little bit of additional time is needed because there is so much of this melon rind remaining in here that it seems completely unnecessary to add more food at this point. And it seems sensible to give them more time to try to kind of finish off eating what they've already been given. However, one thing that I thought might be useful in this bin was a little bit more bedding to place down onto the bottom. So I'm going to give this bin a handful of hacked up cardboard material. I believe this will also be useful for maybe sopping up a little bit of the moisture that's in this bin, which the worms probably don't mind, but it does seem a little bit more damp than it really needs to be. So that's kind of the other purpose. We want to give them a little bit of a nice bedding material to enable them to be able to move around more easily, give them a place to retreat to if they're done eating, but also maintain a medium that's easy for them to travel through. And then I guess I'll just take these cantaloupe rinds that I picked out of the feeding zone and place them back down in on top of the cardboard we just added. And it does seem like, I guess I'm looking around here on the edges now. And that's kind of where I'm starting to see where the nightcrawlers are hanging out a little bit more. Here we can see a number of them. I was also curious to see if these, after this much time, have gotten to that mature stage yet where they develop that little section of their body where it thickens out. And once they do develop that segment, that I believe is an indication of their sexual maturity, which means that they're old enough to start breeding. And I believe on this one I'm starting to see it. It's a little bit tough to tell though. But on a lot of them I don't really see it. Let's see if we can get a few more of these little guys up to the surface so we can inspect them. Let's see if we can get a good close-up look at one of these little guys to see if we can spot that body segment. So I'm just wondering if these are still sort of juvenile worms that have not yet reached adulthood and are not yet at the stage where they might start breeding. I wasn't quite sure of when that might start happening. Oh, this little guy might be big enough to be at that stage. Or maybe not. Here and there, it seems like my eye is catching a glimpse of what appears to be the start of that body segment starting to develop, but I don't really see it very prominently on any of the worms that I checked out. So the worms in this bin might still kind of be juvenile in age and not quite ready to start reproduction, which is fine. I was just curious. I didn't have any sort of an expectation either here nor there. I was just wondering if by any chance maybe they could already have gotten to that point, but it doesn't seem that way. This is what I need. I guess the leafy matter can go back on top to cover these guys up, like so. So I guess in lieu of additional food, we just made the decision to add more bedding underneath the feeding zone. So I think that'll help with what to me appears to be maybe excess moisture. Hopefully it doesn't end up drying out the material too much. So we're just going to give this bin a little bit more time. Let them try to continue working that food they've been given down. And hopefully at some point soon we can give them additional food. But right now it didn't seem like it would be necessary. Now the next bin we're going to look at might be a different story, so let's bring that out here and check. Alright, so now this little tag here is my indicator that this bin is the bin with the larger population. These are not African nightcrawlers, these are European nightcrawlers. And the worms in this bin originated from not 100 cocoons, but rather 500 cocoons, a significantly larger quantity. Now, I don't remember if we had placed the same amount of leaves on the top of each of these, but it does seem like we've got somewhat fewer leaves in this one. Maybe it's because they're coming up to the surface and nibbling on what's in here. And if that's so, then that's cool. It's part of the reason we use leaves, because it's all material that they consider to be edible food items. So I'm going to do the same thing in here, which is just kind of take a quick peek at the food that they were fed with previously. And like I said, a couple days ago there was still adequate leftovers from the last feeding that I didn't feel it was necessary to add more food. And that could very well be the case again in this bin. So let's just inspect the food that they have been working on here for some time now. This is another piece of melon. So here the fleshy part of it is starting to peel off. And that's that recognizable pattern on a cantaloupe melon rind. Reach down a little bit deeper. And then here is another piece of melon with a fairly good sized hunk of remaining fleshy material on it as well. So this is starting to look to me like it might be the same story. We might have plenty of remaining food in here from the last feeding. We might not need to add any more. But I would like to do what I did in the last bin, which is just sort of bring out all of the food items so we can see how they're progressing. And then even more so for this bin than we needed it for the last bin. This bin is the one that seemed to be ejecting a fair amount of liquid out the bottom. This is a pot, a regular planter that some sort of a plant came in, and it does have holes on the bottom, which allows any excess moisture that might build up in the container to drain out the bottom. And I did observe a number of times a fair amount of drippage coming out of this container, and I believe out of the other container as well. So luckily I don't see as much of it happening now as I did a few days ago, so maybe it's finally stopped. But nonetheless, I think the material is still exhibiting a fairly high amount of moisture. It seems a little bit muddy, a little bit more damp than I would like. So if you look down there, you can definitely see it looks very damp down there. So let's, I'm not feeling any other pieces of melon down there. Oh, here's one more piece I found. So yeah, I'm going to kind of excavate down to the bottom again, like we did in the previous bin. Set some of this material off to the side. And like we did before, I'm just going to drop in a handful of cardboard scraps to serve as bedding for this bin. And then down into the pit is going to go the food that we just excavated. All of these chunks of melon. Try to move them back into the middle, push them down into the hole. Yeah, it's pretty damp. But now one thing we did notice in the last bin was that if we tried to scoop along the edges, we found many more worms by doing so. So let's see if we can inspect how these worms are coming along just by seeing if we can excavate a handful of them, bring them up to the surface and check them out. So like on this little guy, see that little lighter section? It looks like that's the body segment that I was referring to earlier. That I believe is the visual indicator that a worm has reached a stage of maturity where it would be capable of reproducing. So these European nightcrawlers in my amateur opinion, not knowing for sure, I guess they might be old enough now to start reproducing. Just funny, every time I deal with the Nightcrawlers, I see them cruising up the walls of the container so much more than I've ever observed the red wigglers doing. So I'm a little bit unaccustomed to seeing that. The red wigglers typically just want to dive down and get out of the light. These European Nightcrawlers are somewhat different in their behavior. I believe this is plastic, so we'll extract that. Alright, so here again, I believe we're in good shape with the existing food allowance that's in here already from some time ago. At this point, I can't remember how many days it's been, maybe 11 days, but if they've not yet depleted what's in there, and it is a fair amount, I don't feel like I'm ready to give them more quite yet, because it is kind of a small bin and there's a fair amount of food remaining. But I do feel good about having added a little bit more bedding, because hopefully that'll help sop up a little bit of this moisture that I think is a bit more than is necessary, and maybe bring the moisture level in the bin down to a level that is a little bit more consistent with what I'm accustomed to. Okay, so I guess what remains here is to simply restore the leaf cover that we removed prior to examining the bin, get all of the coverings back on. But that's about it for today. These are the only bins I really felt like I needed to tend to today. So thanks for keeping me company. I really appreciate that. And if you enjoyed the video, then please consider giving it a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated as well. And if you're into content like this, subscribe to the channel. This way you'll get notifications, especially if you ring the bell, letting you know that there's new content online, and you can check it out right when it's fresh and new. So, all right, everyone, thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye now.